To where are we now? We're in season 5, and we're 6 sessions into our season 5, and we have Terry Bohn here. We haven't heard from in a couple of years, I think, on here, right? I know Terry has sometimes contributed to our newsletter, which is always a bonus, always good, and we're happy to have him back here today. Uh, This is Bob Bailey's 19th Century Baseball Speakers Series, and I say that with all sincerity. and he was its founder and innovator and initiator and everything, and put it all together. And when this started as a pandemic, like a massage during the pandemic, and we couldn't meet live. And it just has really, this is now, we've got the call out for abstracts that went out on, I think, about February 14th or 15th. And the call for abstracts deadline is May the 15th. And I'll be putting out another reminder or two in the months ahead. And I think we have a couple in already, so we're off to a good start. Okay, so Terry, I want to turn it over to you in just a minute. And Bob is going to also give out a few ground rules on chats and all of that stuff, and leaving messages. And I know your topic. My wife asked me at dinner, "What's the topic for tonight's speaker series?" I said, "Well, it's about some guy we never heard of." But it's a sad tale of Dapper Dan Lally. So if I'm saying that right, and Terry or Bob, just if you would give a few instructions and turn it over.
When the speaker starts, when we get the slides all up, if you would kindly mute yourself. It's fundamental reason is to keep the ambient noise in the background down and not to interrupt the speaker. The speaker can't respond to questions during the talk. He'll do that afterwards. Use the chat function at the bottom of your screen. Just run your cursor along there till you find the chat icon. You click on that, and over on the right, there's a little box that says type your message here, and off you go. If you don't have a chat icon, go to the far right where there's a circle with 3 dots. Click that. That's got everything else in it. And if the chat's not already on your screen, bottom of your screen, it'll be there. Let me introduce speaker and give you a little information here. Terry Bohn, and I say it that way because that reminds me of a parish in Louisiana, Terrebonne Parish, south of New Orleans. Talk about a place that floods all the time, but they have great gumbo. Terry is a current board member of the Halsey Hall chapter in Minneapolis, and he has helped to found that organization many years ago. He's, as Peter says, he's been contributing to the newsletter. He's been published in various SABR publications, including the Baseball Research Journal. And something that stunned me when you read it, and they say at last count because he's always working on something, he's done 86 BioProject essays. Thank you, Terry. He works with the minor league committee and the 19th century committees, and has been spoken at regional meetings and the speaker series and various other places. He lives in North Dakota. I've never asked him why, but that's for another time. He's written and self-published 3 books on North Dakota baseball history, and he's in the metropolitan area of Mandan, North Dakota, where he lives with his wife And they have 2 children, 3 grandchildren. And Terry, if you would be so kind as to bring your slides up, we'll get those set and you can start.
Right.
You should be able to hit the share screen button at the bottom of the screen.
Okay, why do I do that?
Have you got, can you find the,
I gotta get rid of the slides here first somehow.
okay, if you get to,
Right, I'll do. Sorry about that. Okay,
once you hit the share screen, the dialog box that contains the name of your slide should show up.
okay. Where is share slide? Where is share screen?
It's a green button usually.
Hey, okay.
There we go.
All right, sorry about that.
Now, if you would just get to full screen, down at the bottom right corner of your slide, there's a little icon just before the slide area. It's a little square. Yeah, go to the right a little more. More right. Got to go 3 more icons. There you go.
Oops. Are we there now,
There
or?
we are. It's all
Okay.
yours. Take it away.
Sorry about the delay there, folks. Everybody. Hey, thanks, everybody. Most of you, I think, remember a while back, Justin McKinney gave a presentation on Jack Farrell, and Vince Ciarella did one on Charlie Fisher, and each involved tracking the careers of some rather obscure players and digging for biographical information. Well, I enjoy doing this kind of thing for minor league players. In Baseball Reference, there are thousands and thousands of minor league players from the 19th century and dead ball era that are just a last name in the records. And I try to dig out identities for some of those if I can, and assign birth and death dates and so on. I tell you that because recently I was working on, there are 5 or 6 players with the last name Lally, who all active in the late 19th century. And as I was sorting through that and trying to figure out who was who, I kept running across the name Dan Lally. And the more I learned about him, the more interested I became. And I found him to be a kind of a tragic figure, and in a lot of ways a sympathetic figure. He's probably not well remembered, if at all, by many today. But I thought I would share a story with you tonight. So thanks, everybody. A little bit of background information. Dan Lally was born October 12th, 1867 in Jersey City. He was the son of Irish immigrants. Baseball Reference has him at 5'11 and a half, 210 pounds, which was a big man for the era. He's a left-handed batter, and he threw right-handed. Dan started as a pitcher, and he was pretty good as a young man. But then, because he was such a good hitter, he was converted to an everyday player. Most of the outfield, he played right field most of his career, and then later, as he aged and it slowed down some, he played some first base. You can see by the one of the few photos we have of him, Dan was a really striking fellow, and he was called throughout his career. He was called Dapper Dan. He was the Bull Brummel of baseball, the Adonis of the diamond, and Handsome Dan. This is rather small, but this is a summary of Lally's playing career. You'll notice that, first of all, that he was an excellent hitter. He hit over 300 10 times in the minor leagues, highlighted in yellow there, and had a 306 career batting average in the minor leagues. In particular, pay attention to that batting line with Minneapolis in 1895. He had 400, had more than 200 hits, 200 runs scored, and 37 home runs. I'll talk a little bit more about that later, put that into some perspective. You'll also notice that Dan's career spanned 20 years, but he never stayed in one place too long. And only 2 of those seasons were in the major leagues. He played the last couple of months of the 1891 season with Pittsburgh, and then about half a season for the St. Louis Browns again in 1897. The explanation for this career path was that Lally was an alcoholic. Some notorious drinkers like Mike King Kelly still had Hall of Fame careers. Players like Lally were an example of unrealized potential. His career also demonstrates that hitters like Lally were often given second and third chances regardless of their off-field habits. He started with an amateur team in Rutherford, New Jersey, and first played professionally with Haverhill in the New England League in 1887. He played a few early season games with Toronto in 1888, and one of those he pitched an exhibition game against the Allegheny City, which was the Pittsburgh franchise in the National League. He then spent a couple of years in New Haven, but in August of 1891, that team disbanded, and he was purchased by Pittsburgh. Barney Dravis, the owner of Pittsburgh, remembered him from that exhibition game, and that's how he got his entry into Pittsburgh. Lally was the regular left fielder the rest of that season, and he hit 24 in 41 games. Now, his descriptions of his play were generally positive about his defense. He said he was covering the position in a very satisfactory manner, and that his throwing is something refreshing to chronicle. But it's not clear what they meant by when they said his batting was very spasmodic. Oops. He was not reserved by Pittsburgh after the season. I could find no information about reports of drinking during the season with Pittsburgh, but later, afterward, reports like this began to surface. Quote, drink was his weakness in Pittsburgh. In his army of old friends, Terry will be sorry to learn if he has fallen into his own old ways. This implies to me that this had been a long-standing problem for him. He signed out with Columbus in the Western League in 1892, spent a couple of years in the South with Memphis and Atlanta, 1892 and 93, and then back to the Eastern League with Erie, Pennsylvania in 93 and 94. Well, he had a couple more 300 seasons. In 1895, he was acquired by Minneapolis, where he'd play off and on until 1904. I mentioned earlier that 1895 season, well, Minneapolis, the Millers played in a little bandbox called Athletic Park, very short dimensions. So a lot of the stats from that season are kind of like a video game. Lally was very impressive, but not quite as impressive as a teammate, Perry Worden, who hit 428 with 45 home runs, 241 hits. Worden's total was the highest home run total in professional baseball until Babe Ruth came along. As I mentioned earlier, players that could hit like Lally, despite the reputation for drinking, were given second chances. You may remember Walter Wilmot, He was a pretty good 19th century outfielder with Chicago and some other teams. After his playing career ended, he managed in Minneapolis. And he acquired Lally 4 separate times. In 1895, he acquired him from Erie. In 1898, from Columbus. Picked him up from the Chicago White Stockings in 1900. And then again, Columbus unloaded him back to Minneapolis again in 1902. Also, when Wilmot took managerial jobs in Louisville in 1901 and out in Butte, Montana in 2004, he took Lally with him to those engagements. In May of 1897, Minneapolis traded him to the St. Louis Browns, for pitcher Bill Hutchison. And he was the Browns' regular left fielder the rest of that season, batting a respectable .284 in 88 games. Early in the season, he was fined by owner Chris Vander for drunkenness, but the fine was rescinded after he promised to reform. Now, the Browns that year were a very poor team. I didn't look up their record, but they were last in the NL. And in mid-September, the team returned from an Eastern road trip. When they got back, Vander fired manager Bill Hellman and fined first baseman Grady, along with Lally, for, quote, emptying several breweries in Boston and Pittsburgh. Now, he fined Lally double the amount he did Grady because of Lally's earlier incident. And there were also reports that he was drunk on the field during a game in Brooklyn. After the season, Mondera unloaded him to Columbus and sent him back to Minneapolis. He had a few more seasons in Minneapolis, but there was increased erratic behavior. His skills began to decline, and he eventually moved to first base. He wrapped up his professional career kind of anywhere anybody would take a chance on him in such all corners of the country, from outposts such as out in Portland, Oregon, Buxton, Minnesota, Butte, Montana, as I mentioned, Charleston, South Carolina. Now, Lally's record in Baseball Reference is blank in 1906, and then shows him with Tulsa and Muskogee, Oklahoma in 1907. There are newspaper reports of a Dan Lally in Tulsa and McAllister and Texarkana, 1906, and a Dan P. Lally in Shawnee, Oklahoma, 1907. However, the descriptions of this Dan Lally hardly sound like our man. One report called him the swiftest of the swift outfielders. Remember, Lally was about 40 years old by this time. And another that, quote, he has no bad habits, neither smoking, drinking, or chewing. So the evidence suggests this is a different Dan Lally, and my research indicates this is a different guy. Dan Lally was also confused with Bud Lally. Bud Lally was an umpire in the National League around the same time, the late 19th century. So they were often confused in the press. So who was our Dan Lally? Apparently, he did not play from 1906 on, and had his baseball career had ended. What is known is that he signed with Dayton, Ohio in 1906, February, but he never played for that team. There were some reports of a Dan Lally playing first base in South Carolina, in Clinton, Iowa. I have my doubts that this was Dan Lally. We do know that he did arrive in Dayton in August 1906, talked with the manager, but they could not come to an agreement. There was some kind of misunderstanding. he never played for Dayton. However, there were some reports from later in 1906, September, for example, that he was living in Grand Rapids, Michigan. They referred to him as Handsome Dan, Lally, and that he is a physical wreck and no longer able to play. Well, that sounds like our Dan Lally there. They also reported that he had been out of the game all the present season because of uh, that engagement with he was under contract with Dayton. Excuse me. So, as far as we know, Dan was in Grand Rapids the end of 1806. He is found listed in the Minneapolis City Directory in 1907. And there was also a report early that year that he was supposed to be somewhere in New Jersey and seemed to have locomotor ataxia or else some other mental trouble. Well, locomotor ataxia is a degenerative disease that almost is always caused by syphilis. However, in March, he may still have been in Grand Rapids as he made the police blotter. So Dan Lally, who has been seen here on the baseball diamond several times, was found by Officer Leach holding a telephone pole on Trowbridge Street. Well, we know that Dan Lally played there in 1891, and that being arrested for clutching a telephone pole might be consistent with public drunken behavior. What we do know is that Lally's marriage is falling apart. In 1897, he married Mamie Conway in Minneapolis, and according to Lally, his downfall began one day while he was playing for Minneapolis in 1903. And I'll read this account. His one thought was of the smile and the wave of the handkerchief that would be his reward from the wife on the front seat of the grandstand. When he arose and dusted the uniform and looked for his reward, the woman for whose praise he had won the game was smiling and talking to another man. We couldn't get along after that. I saw that she did not love me, and I struck out by myself, but booze got the best of me. This is why I said earlier that I found Lally to be a sympathetic character. You have to feel a bit sorry for him after reading this account. More troubles. In 1909, he sued a Minneapolis lumberman named Joseph Burkholder for $100,000 for damages for alienation of his wife's affections. But he agreed to drop the suit if Burkholder provided him transportation to Milwaukee. Now, why he wanted to go to Milwaukee, I don't know. But the following year, Mamie sued him for divorce, alleging desertion. The marriage was annulled. They had no children. In 1910, Dan was adjudicated insane and was admitted to a Milwaukee sanitarium. Over the next 20 years, he lived in various institutions in and around Milwaukee. And by the time of the 1930 census, he was an inmate at the Milwaukee County Infirmary in Wauwatosa, Wisconsin. At some point, he was released because in 1935, he was encountered by Milwaukee police on the streets, destitute, and Lally asked them to take him to jail to, quote, straighten him out. This photo, taken at the time of his arrest, is a much different than the handsome figure he struck as a young ball player. Lally died April 14th, 1936, in Milwaukee County Hospital, and is buried in an unmarked grave at Mount Olivet Cemetery. However, this grave marker was placed in 2008 due to some fundraising efforts by the American Association Almanac. I mentioned earlier that he was often confused with the umpire Bud Lally, and his gravestone has the nickname Bud, but I could not find any reference that he was ever called Bud during his life. I'm moving along pretty quickly, and we have some time, so I'm going to close here with a story. All of us, value historical accuracy, but some stories are just too interesting to ignore. So, in 1897, the Kansas City Times ran a story that alleged that one time, while Lally was playing with Minneapolis, he hit a long fly ball that stuck to a nail protruding from an outfield fence. Before the outfielder could retrieve the ball, Lally circled the bases for a game-winning home run. Well, the details were kind of sketchy. They said it was on some Sunday. It was against St. Paul on the Sunday grounds, and the opposing pitcher was Roger Denzer. I looked at all the games in which Lally and Denzer's careers intersected in Minneapolis and St. Paul, and then thanks to a database compiled by Stu Thornley, a Minneapolis Star historian, I looked at all those games, and nothing like this ever happened. In short, there was no matches. This never happened, but still, I thought an interesting story. So with that, I'll close. That's Dan Lally. His story, I think, is a precautionary tale about the effects of alcoholism and how it can derail the career and the life of a talented ball player. But also, it may be a warning about being married to a woman who flirts with other men while sitting in the grandstand. So thanks, everybody, and now I'll take any questions if anybody might have some.
Terry, thank you very much. That's, it is a rather interesting character. It would be kind of interesting to see what his connection to Milwaukee was, because he spent so much time there afterwards. If you would close your slides now, we'll get back and everybody can see you in full. There you are. Thank you very much. There's been a couple of comments and questions after we got through the obligatory temperature where you live. Peter Mancuso asked, when was Lally in the Army?
I'm sorry.
When was Lally in the Army?
I wasn't aware that he ever was.
Okay.
Did I say something about that?
Peter? He's coming.
Yeah, I kind of thought you did it when you mentioned that some of his old friends showed up at some point and said they were his old Army friends. That's what I thought it said.
No, then I misspoke. No, they were just his army of friends.
Oh, his army of friends. Okay, I got you. Thank you.
Sorry about that.
I was wondering if his drinking might have been connected to the Army.
Not that I'm aware.
Bill Felber notes that there's a certain irony of Chris Vonderop finding players drinking too much, and he thinks should not be go unremarked on. And Jerry Micarenda notes that maybe Lally, when they were talking about him holding onto a pole, he was trying to keep the pole from running away.
A little humor anyway. Hey, Bob.
Yes, sir.
One other observation. I was intrigued that this fellow was nicknamed Adonis and Bull Brummel, et cetera, et cetera. He wasn't the only 19th century player known by those nicknames. Tony Mullane, if I recall, was. Were there others as well? Was it a fairly common nickname in those days?
There were a number of Adonises and handsome
Adonis Terry.
Yeah, and I just think it's the sports writers were making some comment, because you always see something in the papers about, oh, Ladies' Day, and they're here to see XYZ player. Mullane was always credited with being one of the reasons that Ladies' Day was on, and they would draw so many other ladies. But as Joanne and I were talking earlier, it's the sort of classical illusion that was common in the 19th century.
Mhm.
Let's see. Barry Gray notes that Mullane grew up in Erie, Pennsylvania, which is the part of the world that Barry comes from. He's the one that wrote the story on the bluebirds in the last newsletter, the Erie Bluebirds. Was such a long career in the minors commonplace for the period? This is Kevin Doyle asking that. Terry, do you?
Well, I think it was kind of more common, but there's lots of players who, they could make a living for 20 years playing professional ball, and only a small fraction of that might have been in the major leagues. But could make a good living for a long time. So they did.
And they bounced around a lot. When you look at some of the baseball reference minor leaguers, they'll play into their 40s. It's just not that uncommon. And Barry just corrected me, it was the Blackbirds, not the Bluebirds in Erie. Other questions? Dixie.
Terry, good presentation. I'd love to hear stories like this about guys I have no way of knowing about or would ever know about. Point of information and a question. Point of information is the town that he played for in Massachusetts is Haverhill.
Haverhill.
Long A and like there's no second H. Haverhill. My question is, Walt Wilmot was a pretty good player. Did you discover any reason why Wilmot kept taking this guy back? Was he a drinking buddy or just had a soft heart for the guy?
Both, plus the fact that Minneapolis has very good teams then, and Lally was still a very productive hitter when he was sober. So, yeah, he liked him, but he also knew how good he was. And I call him the benefactor because he just kind of looked over him, I think, took care of him a little bit. And to your earlier point, what does the guy from North Dakota know about the East Coast? So
That's
I don't
right.
know.
Our book club meetings, Matt Albertson did a series. He did a complete series of 4 books, nonfiction books about, it was baseball during the Gilded Age, the 1880s, basically. And they were kind of each book in the 4-book series was kind of subtitled with what he was dealing with. And book 1, one of the topics that they were dealing with was alcoholism. And, Lally fits this, he fits the profile just 100%. It's kind of amazing. And what it got me to thinking about was that this was the height of the temperance movement in the United States. A campaign to reduce the, drinking of alcohol, taking oaths and so forth and so on to refrain from taking alcohol. And what I'm wondering is, particularly after the Civil War, how much the press in its exposure or discussions of players drinking, they often had euphemisms for the word, for drinking. Didn't feel good or was sick today or whatever. But I often wonder if that is, if that also fed the temperance movement. I mean, naturally you had your Civil War veterans and so forth who, have reverted to alcoholism to deal with their memories of the war. But you just wonder sometimes how these young athletic men just, would succumb to alcohol and then at the same time it would be so it would be reported in the press. I'm thinking of my very first research in 19th century baseball was on Brewery Jack Taylor, who earned his nickname.
And just a note on alcohol and players. A week from Thursday, on the 20th of March, the book club is going to be talking about the recent biography of Pete Browning, who had his own difficulties with alcohol, and it's a centerpiece of the book. There are several chapters where that takes key notice. John Hulbert noted that encyclopedias, I guess, much like newspaper folks, have wrong nicknames sometimes. Talking about Bill's question, she notes there was an unfortunate Louis J. Brown, who has listed Blower Brown, who was actually a marathon runner from England. The mix-up, since the last name of Brown was so common. And you do see that even assigning nicknames because of famous people, or at least celebrity people there. Jerry Micorendo says, Lally reminds me of the main character of a novel, Ironweed. If anybody's read that book by William Kennedy. Seemed just is that Jerry, because of some of his peripatetic nature or his drinking, or
kind of all of the above. In the book, he's a third baseman for the Washington Senators for a while, and gets kicked off the team because he's drinking, and he ends up being a bum in the Albany area the rest of his life. So, and that book's about 40 years old. Came out in 93, I think. 83.
Yeah. Great movie. It was a great movie too.
Yeah.
Jacob Kalpin notes that Browning in Louisville drinking was integral to baseball culture for many clubs. And I just a note, the Louisville club played at 28th and Elliott Street in the west end of Louisville. And if you look at the city maps, there's like 4 distilleries and breweries within a block of the of that, and where Pete lived was not uncommon for saloons to be on every corner.
I was never able to find anything, but I suspect Lally had some sort of mental illness as well, and maybe some neurological disease of some sort. Of course, there was no diagnosis or treatment then, but I suspect that was also a part of what was going on with him besides the alcohol. But who knows?
And a thank you from Barry Gray, as he's working on some Erie players, and he appreciates the information about Lally since he didn't have much. And as you're showing, I'll tell you, it's an impressive bit of research to have that much information on somebody who had a couple of cups of coffee in the majors. Anything else? Well, thank you, Terry. I appreciate your research and the presentation. Lally is an interesting kind of character that we can wonder about and see if he shows up somewhere else, or if somebody is in any of the towns where he played, there might be some additional information around there. I know Wilmot was the manager in Louisville in 1901, which in 1900, Louisville had no team in professional baseball. Wilmot came, I forget the league, but they only lasted like 3 months and then moved to Grand Rapids, which is how he ended up there, because Wilmot took him along.
Yeah, right.
Well, thank you. Peter, do you have any closing comments?
Yes, Terry. If anybody asks you to or tells you how to pronounce the name of the New England town, you gotta, like Dixie did, you gotta ask him, how many A's are there in car? All right, but I love New England because I'm a Boston Red Sox fan too. So Anyway, Terry, great. Thank you very, very much. That was a very interesting, very interesting research, because when you got multiple, characters out there, that even have some baseball backgrounds in common, you never know exactly who you're researching, and trying to make those distinctions is a nightmare. Well, our next presentation is going to be on April the 8th, and Kevin Doyle is going to do this presentation. I think this is the first one he's ever done for us. A very interesting topic, though, because it's something that we rarely touch on, and that is, in his situation, it's U.S. Navy baseball from 1864, and then he does go all the way like to 1910. And it's kind of an interesting topic, because we very rarely, talk about military baseball, but which is, a huge part of, even when you get back all the way to Custer, when with his group of men up in the West, just around the time of the Little Bighorn. So it's a great topic. It's on April 8th, and Kevin Doyle is going to be our next presenter. So I want to thank everybody for tuning in tonight and your questions and comments. And hopefully we'll see you all next month. And don't forget, about a week and a half from now, 10 days from now, we have on the 18th, I think it is.
20th.
20th, on the 20th, we have Matt Albertson doing our book club discussion about Pete Browning. Okay. Thank you again. And we'll see you all.
Have a good night.
you.
Thanks for me.
Thank you.